Good morning and welcome to the January Division of Adult Education monthly webinar. This session is being recorded. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of the session. No other recording of this session is allowed. This includes any kind of AI note-taking software. So if you have that, please turn that off. Also, if you happen to have your camera on, it will record your image as well. So if you don't want your image to be recorded, please turn off your camera. And I will also remind you that when you join, not Teams doesn't always mark you muted, and so I think people are joining with their mics on, so you'll want to turn those off. Mute yourselves. Thank you. Okay. Today is a division-led webinar. I'll provide some updates and reminders, and then Cheryl and Shelley will talk about the performance accountability policy that we will be implementing. So earlier this month, I sent out an email letting programs know that the Division of Adult Education has been given permission to use unexpended 24-25 state funds, which we kind of informally call waiver funds, to provide additional funds to agencies this year. As in past years, these are one-time funds that must be used by June 30th, 2026, and that will not be renewed in 26-27. These funds are only available on grants that already have state funding, which would be the Adult Basic Education Direct Service 064 state budget, the Family Literacy 054 grants, and the Tutoring Program for Adults 259 grants. The Division of Adult Education, we're proposing to make these funds available in kind of two different ways. The first is familiar to you. It is through incentive funding. So programs that achieved at least 55% of contracted enrollment based on data pulled from eData on January 2nd, 2026 at around 6 p.m. will receive a dollar amount, which is yet to be determined, for each student that has shown a measurable skill gain by pre-post testing, earning a high school equivalency credential, or passing a high school equivalency subtest during that same period, during the first 6 months of the program year. For the tutoring programs, we will also be looking at the number of tutors that have 12 or more hours of service, and that will also have to be 55% in order for you to be eligible for incentive funds for that grant. Agencies that have not reached 55% of contracted enrollment on the grant will not be eligible for any incentive funds related to the outcomes on that grant. We do hope to let you know sooner rather than later, no later than the end of January, the anticipated incentive funding that you will receive. As in prior years, you are, even if you're eligible for incentive funds, you do not need to accept them. You don't need to accept the full amount. We recognize that there was a significant delay in your receiving grant funding, and so some of you had to hold off on hiring new staff and things like that. So you may have fewer expenditures in the first half of the year, and you don't need any additional funds. That's fine. We're not going to force you to take them. Or if you can only use a portion, that's fine as well. Incentive funds, if you receive them, can be used to cover any expenditures that are allowable on a state 064, 054, or 259 grant. As a reminder, the overall floors and ceilings for administration and, well, the overall ceilings for administration and 2160 still apply. in your overall grant expenditures. From the funds that were not awarded through incentive funding, we will consider requests from agencies to use any remaining waiver funds for any of the following. We have heard from agencies that the cost for group insurance, especially health insurance, has gone up considerably in many cases from what you had originally budgeted for. And so you're seeing a gap in the amount that you budgeted to cover the cost of that insurance versus what it's actually going to cost you. So you can request funds to cover that gap. Now, this would be like group insurance that you'd already budgeted for, and it's a lot more than what you had budgeted. This isn't like suddenly, oh, now we're going to give people health insurance, right? Because these are not funds that you're going to necessarily get next year, or you won't get next year. So, keep that in mind. This is kind of like to cover a gap, an unanticipated gap in your budget for expenditures that you had already budgeted for, and it just turns out that they're a lot more expensive than you thought they were going to be. Same for rent for classroom space. Some of you rent classroom space, and depending on the rental period, the lease period, you may find out that there's been a sudden increase in the cost of rent due to increased utilities, etc. So if you have current space and your landlord has come to you and said that they're sharply increasing it, you're welcome to submit a request for the difference in what you budgeted and what it is it's going to be. We'd also like to encourage you to consider having staff attend the PACE conference and/or the Pennsylvania Workforce Development Association conference. That's what PWDA is. They are very close together. PACE is the in-person is a 2-day on April 26th and 27th, and then there's a virtual day on May 1st. And then the PWA conference is in person in Hershey, at the Hershey Lodge, I believe. I believe it's May 6th through 8th. One thing to know about the Pennsylvania Workforce Development Association conference is they do have the option to just attend one day. So, if you don't want to be gone for 3 days, the Thursday is really the one long day. And so it is possible to just go for a day and just pay for that day. But if you are interested in attending these conferences, or you have staff that you would like to attend, and that was not budgeted for in your original budget, you could request funds to cover those costs. We are hearing that there are more students wanting to go to remote instruction, but they don't necessarily have internet access. And so some programs choose to buy hotspots that they give to students to help them access remote instruction, and you could request funding for that. You can't do anything like requesting funding to help students pay for broadband, because that's like a utility cost, but you just can't do that. But if you want to purchase hotspots to give to students, you can do that. And also we have heard that in some cases, agencies do have waiting lists for classes, and you could request funds to pay teachers additional hours to teach additional classes for realistic waiting lists. These funds are available to any agencies, not just those that are eligible for incentive funds. For these additional funds, you must submit a request to your advisor. We really would like it no later than tomorrow, if at all possible, early next week at the latest, with the specific amounts for each category and documentation to justify the request. So if you have something that shows an increase in rent or an increase in insurance, For attendance at the conferences, you can just give them a number of individuals who you would like to attend. Um, additional classes to address the waiting list. You would need to provide documentation or evidence that there are sufficient students who are truly interested and able to attend the class that you plan to open or classes, and that you have someone on hand to teach that class. Kind of the reason for that short turnaround time is that we have to submit a waiver fund spending plan to our budget office by July 31st, and my bureau director and deputy secretary both have to review and sign off on that spending plan before January 1st. So we have kind of a pretty tight turnaround time to get approval to push out the funds before we can officially notify you the exact amount and all of that kind of stuff. Prior to requesting any additional funds, please review your current year-to-date funding situation to ensure that you truly need and can fully expend the additional funds. Also, if once you get your funding adjustment notification letter, you determine that you do not need the full amount, you can let your advisor know. We can reduce that amount at that time so that you don't get more than you need. I do want to explain why I'm saying that is those of you who have gotten incentive funds in the past couple years, you know that those get paid out in kind of a lump sum because it's tied to a different budget year than your regular grant. So even though within e-grants, it looks like it's just being added to your overall, 25, 26 state 064 budget, within our accounting system, it's a separate budget year. And so the comptroller's office just sends it out in a lump sum payment rather than doing monthly payments on that. And we also do that because a lot of programs choose to use incentive funds to do something like give staff incentive funding or pay registration for conferences. And so you need the money up front or sooner. It's not, to cover general monthly payments or anything. So you do get the money up front. What that means is if you don't expend it all, when you do the FER, you're going to have received funds that you now have to return to us. And for the 064 grants, if for some reason you owe us state funds and we owe you federal funds, you have to return the state funds to us. The check has to be processed, and all of that has to happen before I can approve the FER for both federal and state. And that all has to happen before we can release the federal funds to you. And we had a couple agencies that were in that situation this year where they had to, even before the budget passed and they had gotten any money this year, they had to send us a check for state funds owed before they could get the federal funds that we owed them. So there is a reason that I'm saying, be careful with what you request, because we don't want a situation in which, you owe us $5,000 in state funds, we owe you $25,000 in federal funds, but you have to send us those $5,000 before we send you the 25, this fall after you submit the FER. Oops. Okay, sorry about that. This is a reminder around data entry related to program staff. There is a national reporting system table that we have to complete, Table 7, which is a report on adult education personnel by function and job status. And the NRS and Technical Assistance Guide for states says that we are to report positions paid out of federal, state, or local funds that support the work of the adult education and, in Pennsylvania, family literacy programs. There's also a column to report volunteers. And on the slide, there's a bulleted list of positions. Those are the labels of the positions that we report on. So there's administrative, supervisory, ancillary services is one category, counselors, paraprofessionals, and teachers, right? So that administrative would include you as those of you who are program administrators, your coordinators, your data entry folk, people who aren't necessarily tied to classes in eData, but we still need you to enter them. Counselors would be your student support specialists, anyone kind of providing that kind of support. If you have someone who's hired to be an assessment administrator, I would put that under the administrative role. Paraprofessionals would be anyone paraprofessional or classroom aides, and then the teachers would include paid teachers as well as your tutors. You don't need to call them teachers. When we do the calculations, anyone who's listed as a volunteer tutor gets included under teachers. But I did want to stress why we're asking you to include program staff in eData, and it is because we do include that in our reports to the Department of Education. The other thing to remind everyone is when your data entry folk are entering your staff, that they double check the adult ed experience category in eData and that you update it to reflect the accurate years of experience. We have some folks in there who have a start date of, say, 2020 who still have experience as under 1 year. Because they just keep rolling over the record and they don't update that. So we would request that you kind of look at that and make sure that the adult ed experience information is accurate. So on the administrative documents webpage, first of all, I wanted to let everyone know that policy C-135 is outdated. We haven't gotten it updated to reflect all of the changes that we've made in how we're doing agency measurable skill gain. So just wanted to kind of let you know that. The other thing to be aware of is that the Pennsylvania Department of Education is going through a process of converting documents that are less than 10 pages long into web pages versus PDFs. There's a reason for this. Having it as web pages is much more accessible. It's translatable, all of those kind of things. Unfortunately, what it means is it is not printer friendly. If you go to our administrative documents page, there are 2 policies that have already been converted to web pages. I believe the monitoring rubric has been converted to a web page. The integrated English literacy and civics education content guide has been converted to a web page. So that's kind of happening. So if you get to that and you see it, it's not, there's nothing wrong with the page. It's just something that's happening. I don't know what the timeline is. So I can't say, as of this day, they're all going to be converted. I think it's just kind of happening little by little, but just wanted to let everyone know that. And okay, got 10 more minutes. I wanted to let everyone know, now I cannot provide lots of information. I cannot give you details, but I can let you know that we do have competitions that will be coming up sometime within the next 6 months for grants that start July 1st. In 3 areas, the state leadership grants, the tutoring program for adults grant, and the Section 243 integrated English literacy and civics education grants. I don't have target dates, anything like that, just letting you know that it's coming and reminding you that we always post information to our Division of Adult Education grants page. So you'll want to check that. What I will say is check that. Please don't email your advisors on a regular basis asking when things are open. We do have fairly strict, or WIOA has fairly strict rules around how we handle providing information about grant competitions. So the specifics have to be shared publicly and cannot be shared specifically with current grantees, which is why I'm just saying, the webpage is the way we share the information with everyone. So please check that regularly. Another thing to remind you is that as current grantees, you do not automatically get access to competitive grants. So if you believe you're interested in applying for any of these and you see information on our website that they will be open, there will be a request for grant application guidelines, and you will want to read that thoroughly and follow any instructions that are included in it about how to gain access to the grants when they finally open. I did want to let everyone know that the Section 243 Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Grants, this will be the fourth grant cycle. And we've changed things over the course of the grant cycle, but I think a lot of people are still thinking about the very restrictive way we ran it in the first competition, and we have made some changes, and we plan to make some additional changes for this next grant cycle. Again, I can't share them specifically with you. They will be available in the resources that are on that the web page. But in general, we plan to allow greater flexibility than in prior grant cycles. The law and the regulations require that agencies that receive Section 243 IELCE grants, you have to provide integrated English literacy and civics education activities, right? You have to do that. That is a required activity under this grant, which is integrated English language acquisition, literacy, and civics education. So that is a required activity of anyone who gets this grant. We will be providing much more flexibility in the requirement to provide access to an IET. And I think that has been a bit of a barrier for some programs around what exactly that means and how to do it. So there will be flexibility there. I would encourage you, if this is something you think you're interested in, but you're a little overwhelmed by the thought of it, talking to maybe some of your colleagues who might also be interested in doing this and looking at applying together as a consortium. It's not required. We can't require you to do that, but it is something you might want to look at and kind of begin thinking about. Just letting you all know that. We have a couple minutes before I want to make sure that Shelley and Cheryl have a full 30 minutes to cover their items. Are there any questions? What I would say, if you have very specific questions about whether or not you can request additional funds for a certain thing, I would shoot that email to your advisor, and then we can discuss it. Just because your agency requests additional funds doesn't mean you're going to get the full amount. We've got a limited amount of funding. So, you can always request it, and we can always come back and say, no, that doesn't fall within the realm of what we were thinking of. But if you have specific questions, please reach out to your advisors. Okay, I do not see any hands raised or any chats. So I will go ahead and mute myself, and I will allow Shelley and Cheryl to take over.
Thanks, Amanda. So today, Cheryl and I are discussing the new performance accountability policy. Our focus is not just on compliance, but on how this policy serves as a framework to ensure all of our adult education programs are successful and sustainable. The heart of this policy is support. By identifying potential issues early, we can intervene before they become systemic failures. This is about being partners in performance, not just monitors of compliance. PDE is committed to fostering a continuous improvement culture through transparency and collaboration that supports the success and accountability of funded activities of grantees and subgrantees. So continuous monitoring supports the early identification and rapid resolution of issues before they become entrenched or expand in scope. We advisors will use available information sources to assess risk for low performance, as well as identify trends that may indicate a need to develop and deliver technical assistance or training to address those challenges. Continuous monitoring activities may include performance data review provided through eData, fiscal data through quarterly reports, and our usual monthly check-in calls. Next slide. Thanks. Performance must meet or exceed primary indicators established by the division. Our program performance standards aren't arbitrary. They're based on the state's targets as negotiated with OCTAE for the current program year. Whether you're a large or small grantee doesn't matter. If you receive direct service funding, these standards apply to you. Grantees are subject to specific accountability processes if the division determines they have failed to remain on track to meet their performance targets. These targets are established based on performance criteria such as percentage of contracted enrollment and measurable skills gains, which are determined during the current program year for the 2026-27 grant continuation year. We do recognize that outcomes and expenditures may have been impacted by the date of availability of funds. So we will consider how those delays in finalized contracts and fund availability may impact your spending and performance results before taking into any official action. Next slide. While grantees are responsible for addressing poor performance, we are here to provide support through the following intervention strategies. We may create a program performance improvement plan, which we are affectionately calling the PPIP, or one-on-one technical assistance and or regular progress reviews and review meetings, or any other intervention PDE deems necessary to ensure success. Next slide. A PIP is a formal documented strategy to fix underperformance by setting clear, measurable goals for grantees and or subgrantees, identifying the root causes and barriers, detailing specific actions and resources like training, assigning timelines, and establishing regular monitoring and feedback to ensure the program meets its objectives and improves overall outcomes. So the PIP acts kind of like a roadmap for success, rather than just a precursor to penalties. And now I'll turn it over to Cheryl to talk about the elements of performance improvement plans and how it differs from a corrective action plan. Cheryl?
Thank you. Next slide, please. The program performance improvement plan must be specific. We don't just want to know what is being addressed for improvement, but we want to see how and why and when and who. That accountability starts with defining the staff positions responsible for each activity. A performance improvement plan then must include a clear description of the deficiency the program is addressing, specific goals to be achieved, actions that will be taken to meet the objectives, identifying the staff who will be responsible for each activity, the expected results or changes that will occur, and a schedule when activities will be completed. How success will be measured and the data collected and analyzed to demonstrate impact. An itemized list of how grant funds will be used if applicable. For example, dedicated funding for targeted recruitment to increase enrollment. The evaluation plan is critical. You will be able to provide the intervention work, that intervention worked, and also note the budget piece if you need to shift funds to solve the issue, like hiring and recruitment, that needs to be itemized here. Next slide. A program performance improvement plan and a corrective action plan serve different purposes and are used at different levels of correction and of different levels of concern. The program performance improvement plan is supportive intervention for lagging outcomes, such as enrollment numbers and measurable skill gains, while a correction action plan is a formal mandate to fix specific compliance or management violations of findings addressed in a formal monitoring review. A program performance improvement plan is primarily preventive and improvement focused. It is typically required when a program is not meeting some of those program benchmarks, such as measurable skill gains or enrollments, as mentioned. The goal is to identify performance gaps, analyze contributing factors, and outline strategies and timelines and supports to improve those outcomes. Performance improvement plans are time-limited, monitored closely, and intended to help the program get back on track without penalties. Next slide, please. A corrective action plan is that formal mandate triggered by findings and conditions of noncompliance discovered during formal monitoring reviews. Unlike the performance improvement plan, which is time limited and focused on lagging outcomes, the corrective action plan specifically addresses corrective actions related to compliance findings and is not considered complete until all the identified findings have been fully addressed. Next slide, please. It's our final slide. Take a look at those comparisons. This table points out the difference between the program performance improvement plan and a correction action plan, outlining how each intervention is used to manage agency performance and compliance. A performance improvement plan is designed as a supportive intervention with the primary purpose of helping a program get back on track. We've identified its focus as preventive, addressing agency performance-related issues that are typically triggered by lagging outcomes or missed benchmarks. It addresses issues regarding specific enrollments, performance target rather than serious legal or management violations. This process is intended to help programs recover without immediate penalties, though failure to address non-compliant items will result in conditions being placed on the grant and may have possible funding implications. In contrast, a correction action plan is used specifically to address non-compliance and management issues that are findings in the monitoring report. This correction action plan is initiated to fix specific findings identified through formal and targeted monitoring groups, which include the examination of agency documents, meetings with staff, students, and resolving these issues is a requirement. Like the program improvement plan, neglect of the plan leads to grant conditions and may impact funding if the findings remain unresolved. Are there any questions concerning the difference between the performance improvement plan and the correction plan?
We'll give folks a little time to process. I'll go back to that slide. I will provide a little bit of context for this. You know, we grantees have contracted enrollment, and as you know, Shelley pointed out, you know, we have targets that we have to meet. I've mentioned several times at the beginning of this year that OCTAE, the U.S. Department of Education, has begun holding states accountable for performance, and that failure to meet targets can result in consequences for the state, including potentially loss of some funding in the governor's reserve funds. You know, most of you are doing well, but we have some grantees that are fairly consistently not meeting contracted enrollment, and or have very low measurable skill gains. We need those to improve. And if an agency is consistently unable to meet contracted enrollment, is consistently underperforming when it comes to measurable skill gains, given the potential implications of that performance on overall state performance and therefore potential impact on future funding, et cetera, you know, there have to be consequences for that. We can't continue to fund programs that aren't serving people and aren't getting outcomes. Those of you who have been in the field since before the pandemic know that back in 2019-20, we actually began implementing something like this. A lot of programs had corrective, what we called back then, action plans to address lack of enrollment or low, at the time we looked at Table 4B, EFL gain performance. And there were, I would say by far the majority of programs had to have some kind of, like I said, what we called action plans for 1920. With the pandemic, we suspended those activities, and we are now working to implement those again. So that's the context for this. And the advisors have been, you know, really looking into things and thinking about how to make it meaningful and supportive, in the hopes that we won't have to affect funding for any agency, that they'll be able to meet the obligations of the grant with support of the division, but that ultimately, if a program is unable to do that, that there are consequences. And those funds could then be distributed to other programs that are showing success.
Amanda, I'd like to also remind folks that the data awareness campaign was also is going to be a great tool for folks to really lean on to look at their data, right? So the information that's presented in these PIPs shouldn't come by a surprise if people are using the tools and tips and tricks that they learn in this course. It'll help them connect the dots between all these pieces and be able to see potentially where there are, dips in measurable skill gains or enrollments, and they may be able to correct these dips down before they become bigger problems that could potentially impact funding. So if you are not enrolled yet in the data awareness campaign, please speak with folks at your agency to see if that's something that you think you should be a part of, because it really could help with the PIPs.
Or it could prevent you from having to do a PIP. And that's really what we want, right? Really what the whole point of the data awareness campaign is, to really kind of have agencies. It's our way of supporting you to focus on looking at your data and using your data to improve performance, so that you're getting the outcomes that we want, so that you don't ever have to have a PIP. Because you're meeting your contracted enrollment and you're meeting outcome targets, especially the measurable skill gain targets, right? So the idea isn't that everybody's going to do a PIP, right? The PIP, this program performance improvement plan, is going to be required of programs that have demonstrated lack of ability to meet contracted enrollment or performance outcomes. So, if you're meeting contracted enrollment and meeting measurable skill gain targets and other targets, you won't have to worry about this. You may still have a corrective action plan when we come and monitor you if we identify very specific findings related to the items that Shelley and Cheryl discussed. And of course, what is not on here is the Program Improvement Professional Development Plan, which all programs will still do, because that supports ongoing professional development in your programs, and is, it's designed to improve your services regardless of how well you're doing already. If there are any questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask it, or you're welcome to type it into the chat. Okay, it looks like there aren't any questions, so we will end here. I hope you all have a good rest of the month of January.